I stood in the cracked parking lot of what used to be Preston Holloway's gleaming corporate headquarters on the outskirts of Dallas. The sun beat down relentlessly, baking the asphalt and bleaching the skeletal remains of the once grand building behind me. A tattered for sale sign clattered against a chain-link fence in the hot breeze. Weeds poked through fissures in the pavement, and scattered debris, crumpled papers, a broken computer monitor, a discarded tie littered the ground. The scene looked like a monument to broken promises and squandered fortunes, and it felt like a fitting metaphor for what my life had become over the past year. A wreckage of shattered trust and bitter heartbreak. I towed a shard of glass with my boot and tried to decide what, if anything, I could salvage from the ruins of this chapter of my life. In the distance, thunderheads were gathering above the flat Texas horizon, dark purple against the harsh sun, threatening a storm. A welcome reprieve from the heat perhaps, but also a reminder of the turmoil that had led me here. I closed my eyes against the glare and exhaled slowly, thinking back to the chain of events that had brought everything crashing down. I remembered when I first met Jessica one Friday night at a bar on Greenville Avenue, not long after my 30th birthday. At the time, I was working 12-hour days getting my small auto repair business off the ground. I specialized in restoring classic cars and tuning high-performance engines, work that I loved, but it didn't leave me much time or energy for a social life. My buddy Travis had dragged me out that night, insisting I needed a break. The place was loud and crowded, and I felt out of my element nursing a beer in the corner while everyone else laughed and mingled. Then Jessica breezed into my life. She slid up to the bar beside me to order a drink, flashing a quick smile when our eyes met. She was stunning, tall and confident, with chestnut hair tumbling over her shoulders and bright green eyes that seemed to take everything in at once. Dressed in a fitted sundress and boots, she looked like the kind of woman who could turn heads in any room. I was instantly tongue-tied when she said hello, but she had an easy way of talking that put me at ease. Within minutes, we were chatting like old friends. Jessica had a light, musical laugh and a charming Dallas drawl, and she made me feel interesting and funny even as I stumbled over my words. It turned out she worked as an office manager at a dental clinic, and she'd come out with some girlfriends who promptly abandoned her to go dance. "I'm not much for dancing," she confided conspiratorially, rolling her eyes at the crowded dance floor. "I'd rather sit and talk." That was fine by me. We talked for an hour straight about my restoration projects, about her favorite travel spots, about the Texas summer heat, anything and everything. By the end of the night, I'd gathered the courage to ask for her number. She saved me from having to be too smooth about it by programming her name and number into my phone herself, with a playful wink. I texted her the next day, and we met up for dinner that Sunday. To my surprise, the conversation flowed as easily as it had at the bar. Jessica was whip-smart and witty, and I found myself hanging on her every word. She was also surprisingly interested in my work. A lot of people's eyes glaze over when I start talking cars, but not hers. She asked questions, laughed at my jokes about stubborn engines, even mentioned she'd love to see the shop sometime. For a guy who'd been spending most of his time with carburetors and crankshafts, having a beautiful woman show genuine interest in me was intoxicating. One date turned into two, then three. We started seeing each other every week, then several times a week. I'd swing by her place after closing up the garage, still in my oil-stained work shirt, and she'd greet me with a cold beer and a warm kiss. On weekends, I took her riding on my old Harley down the country roads outside the city, or we'd drive out to a lakeside picnic. Those were some of the happiest days of my life. I couldn't believe how lucky I was. Jessica was kind, fun, and absolutely gorgeous. I was falling hard, and it seemed she felt the same about me. Within a few months, the attraction between us had grown white-hot. I'll admit I was a bit unsure of myself when it came to taking the next step physically. I'd had a couple of short-term girlfriends before, but nothing as serious as this, and I didn't want to mess it up. But Jessica was confident and affectionate, and one steamy night in her apartment, she made it very clear with a mischievous smile that we'd been dancing around the inevitable for long enough. That night was like nothing I'd experienced. Passionate, intense, and somehow both tender and carnal at once. After that, intimacy became our secret language. She'd text me flirty messages during the day that made my heart race, and most nights we couldn't keep our hands off each other. About 6 months into dating, we decided to make things easier on ourselves and moved in together. I asked her to move into my place, a modest 2-bedroom house I'd bought near Richardson. It wasn't much, but I'd poured a lot of sweat equity into fixing it up just like one of my cars. We painted the walls, set up a little vegetable garden in the backyard, and even adopted a rescue mutt named Bandit who became our constant companion. Coming home to Jessica and that wagging tail every day felt like heaven. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't lonely. I had a partner, someone to laugh with over takeout pizza on the couch, someone to hold at night. A year after we moved in, I proposed. Maybe it was a bit quick, but I knew what I wanted. I wanted her by my side for good. I planned a romantic proposal at White Rock Lake at sunset, and when I fumbled out the ring, she tackled me with a hug and shouted yes before I could even finish my speech. We had a simple wedding at a small church, with a reception at a local BBQ joint. Nothing fancy, just friends, a few of her relatives from out of town, and my mom who flew in from Oklahoma. Jessica looked radiant that day, and I remember thinking I was the luckiest man alive. After the wedding, life settled into a comfortable groove. We were by no means rich. My shop paid the bills but wasn't making us millionaires. However, we did all right. We upgraded to a nicer three-bedroom house in a decent Plano neighborhood and talked about maybe having kids in a few years. Jessica decorated the place with her characteristic flair, turning our house into a warm, welcoming home. I loved being married. I loved calling her my wife, seeing her eyes light up when I said it. Marriage brought me a sense of peace and purpose I'd never had before. Of course, we had our little struggles. I worked long hours and often came home exhausted and greasy, which sometimes frustrated her when I'd collapse on the couch instead of taking her out. She had a wider social circle than I did, and occasionally dragged me to networking events or parties that her friends threw. I could manage small talk when needed, but I was always happier tinkering in the garage or having a quiet night in. She'd tease that I was turning into an old man before my time. In turn, I sometimes felt a pang of inadequacy when her eyes would linger on a fancy car pulling up beside us at a red light, or when she scrolled through social media and showed me pictures of some acquaintance's lavish vacation. I chalked it up to normal envy. Didn't we all wish for a bit more sometimes? On the whole, though, I thought we were solid. We rarely fought, and when we did, it was over trivial stuff. Me forgetting to text if I was coming home late, or her habit of ordering takeout on the credit card too often. I truly believed we loved each other and that whatever challenges came our way, we'd face them together. If someone had told me then that my wife would betray me in the most devastating way imaginable, I would have laughed them off. We had been married just over 2 years when the topic of Preston Holloway first came up in our home. By then, Preston had become a peripheral figure in our lives. After I'd successfully restored his '69 Camaro, Preston sang my praises all over town, sending a few wealthy car buddies my way as clients. I was grateful for the referrals and flattered by his compliments. He even invited Jessica and me to a gala at the Petroleum Club downtown, a fundraising event for a charity he chaired. It was far fancier than any event I'd ever attended. Black tie, champagne, the works. I remember renting a proper tuxedo and feeling like an imposter surrounded by Dallas elite in the glittering ballroom. Jessica, however, shone. She wore a sleek red dress we'd splurged on and moved through the crowd with ease, chatting and laughing as if she'd been born to this life. I stuck close to her and nursed a single glass of whiskey, trying not to gawk at the oil barons and real estate magnates sharing hors d'oeuvres around us. At our table, Preston made sure to seat Jessica next to him. I ended up on his other side, fielding his occasional jovial elbow nudge and booming commentary about how the Cowboys were looking this season. But I noticed how his attention kept drifting to my wife. He complimented her dress, joked that he ought to steal her away to run his foundation because she could charm the pennies out of a miser. She laughed it off, but I saw the way her eyes sparkled at his remarks. I couldn't blame her. Preston was a charismatic man. In his mid-40s with silvering hair at the temples and an athletic build, he had the easy confidence of someone used to being listened to. He regaled the table with witty anecdotes and drew Jessica into conversation about the charity's cause. I recall him touching her arm lightly as she said something that made him roar with laughter. A vague unease tugged at me then, but I pushed it aside. This was just Preston's personality, larger than life. And Jessica was eating it up, but in an innocent way, or so I thought. Not long after that gala, Jessica started mentioning Preston more often at home. She told me he had invited her to join the committee planning another fundraiser. "It's a really good cause, Jake," she explained one evening as we washed dishes together. "Scholarships for underprivileged kids." He said he could use someone with organizational skills, and he thought of me because of my experience managing the dental office. She looked proud, and maybe I imagined it, but there was a slight pleading in her tone, as if she needed my approval. I wiped my hands and kissed her cheek. If you want to do it, go for it. Sounds like something you'd enjoy. She beamed and gave me a soapy hug. Thank you. I know it'll mean some extra meetings after work, but it's temporary, just until the gala in a few months. True to her word, within a week she started attending evening planning sessions. Every Wednesday, she had come home late, glowing with excitement about the people she met and the plans they were making. I was happy for her. It felt like she'd found a passion project. It never crossed my mind to be suspicious that she was spending more time at Preston's downtown office, or that he often drove her home afterward to save her the commute, as she mentioned casually. Why would I be? Preston was a friend, and he had a wife of his own, whom I'd briefly met at the gala, a polite, elegant woman named Claire. Everything seemed above board. Then came the night Jessica brought up Preston's business venture. She set the scene perfectly, though I didn't realize it was deliberate until later. I came home on a Friday to find the house filled with the mouth-watering smell of slow-cooked ribs. She knew ribs were my favorite. On the dining table, she'd laid out a feast. Mac and cheese, collard greens, cornbread, the works. A couple of cold beers waited by my seat. Soft country music played in the background. It wasn't a special date like an anniversary or my birthday, just a random Friday. In hindsight, I should have been more curious about why she'd gone all out. Over dinner, we relaxed and talked about my day at the garage and her week at the clinic and the foundation. She listened with keen interest as I recounted how I'd finally diagnosed a tricky issue in a client's Corvette. It felt cozy and domestic, one of those golden moments in marriage you treasure. As we lingered over second helpings, Jessica dabbed her lips with a napkin and cleared her throat softly. Honey, can we talk about something? I have sort of an idea I want to run by you. Sure, I said, leaning back contentedly. What's up? She reached over and laid her hand on mine, a gesture that usually meant she was a bit nervous. Her palm was slightly sweaty. You know how Preston has that new business project? The luxury auto complex he's developing near Frisco? He mentioned it at the gala, remember? I did recall. Over dessert at the gala, Preston had animatedly described his plans for a state-of-the-art luxury car dealership and auto spa, essentially a one-stop playground for car enthusiasts with deep pockets. A showroom, custom shop, storage facility, private lounge, the works. It sounded ambitious and expensive. I nodded. Yeah, I remember. What about it? Well, she squeezed my hand. He's taking on a few private investors. Just people he knows and trusts. It's a really exciting opportunity, Jake. He said the projections are fantastic. If we invest a little now, we could see a big return once it's up and running. I felt a prickle of caution. Invest? Jess, we don't exactly have piles of cash lying around. What kind of investment is he looking for? She gave an eager little smile. He's breaking it into shares. The minimum buy-in is $50,000. I was thinking, maybe we could do it. We have some savings, and your business has been doing well this year. I know it's a lot, but it could double or triple in a few years if the complex succeeds. Preston even said that he'd consider it a personal favor and would make sure we get VIP treatment there for life. I let out a low whistle and pulled my hand free to rub my face. 50 grand. Jess, that's not a small amount for us. That's most of our rainy day fund. What if it doesn't pan out? She was ready with answers. The land is already purchased, and he's gotten commitments from major car brands to have showrooms there. He's not some fly-by-night guy. You know he's successful. And think about how passionate you are about cars. This is something you understand. It's like, we'd be investing in something that you could even be involved in down the line. Maybe you could run one of the custom garages there, who knows? Her eyes shone with enthusiasm. I knew she was trying to sell me not just on the financial upside, but on the emotional one. The idea of being part of a car mecca. It was tempting, I admit, and seeing her so excited, so hopeful, made me want to say yes. Still, I tried to stay practical. It does sound interesting, I conceded, but nearly cleaning out our savings on one venture. If it goes belly up, we're in a world of hurt. Did he give any paperwork, business plan or something? I'd need to see details. He did, she said quickly, as if relieved I hadn't shut her down outright. She darted into the living room and came back with a glossy folder that had Holloway Ventures embossed on it. Inside was an executive summary of the project, complete with artist renderings of the complex and some financial projections. I didn't understand all of it, but the numbers were big and bold. The potential profit in 5 years looked astronomical, if everything went perfectly. We spent an hour going over it. Jessica leaned against my shoulder, chiming in with tidbits she'd clearly been coached on, about the growth of the North Texas luxury market, Preston's track record with past investments. He had turned a failing shopping center into a profitable entertainment plaza, etc. It was obvious she'd been well briefed. That should have been another warning sign, but I was too caught up in the momentum she was creating. In the end, I agreed to do it. Part of me was swayed by the financial logic, but a bigger part just wanted to make her happy. She was so thrilled she nearly knocked me over with a hug and peppered my face with kisses. "You won't regret it, I promise," she squealed. I forced a smile, still anxious about the money, but warmed by her giddiness. "All right, but I'll want something in writing from Preston. I mean it. This is business after all." "Of course," she said, already pulling out her phone. "He'll have his lawyers draw up an agreement. Oh, babe, you'll see. It's the best decision we ever made." If only I'd known what I was really signing up for. Over the next week, I moved funds around. I liquidated a modest investment account I'd built up and took a leaner line of credit on my shop. It was a little painful watching that money, years of hard work and scrimping, leave our bank, but I reminded myself it was for a shot at a better future. True to his word, Preston delivered a formal investment contract. I read it carefully. It seemed straightforward. We'd own a small percentage of the development, with payouts scheduled after certain milestones and a balloon payout once it opened. I even paid a local attorney a small fee to double-check the paperwork, and he said it looked standard, though he did mutter something about all projections being optimistic by nature. We signed, and the deal was done. Jessica was over the moon. She bragged to her girlfriends that we were partnering with one of the big players in town, talking as if we were suddenly moving up in society. I won't lie. I felt a swell of pride seeing her proud of me, proud that I'd provided this opportunity. It felt like maybe I was finally giving her the life she deserved. But as the weeks turned into months, I heard little about the project. The land had been cleared, but construction seemed slow. "Permitting issues," Jessica relayed from Preston when I asked why nothing new had happened. The project's first milestone came and went with no payout, accompanied by a letter citing construction delays and rescheduled timelines. When I showed concern, Jessica tut-tutted me for being impatient. "You know developments take time, Jake. You can't expect to see returns overnight." Besides, Preston said once the city approves the revised permits, things will move fast. I struggled to hide my irritation. The revised permits explanation felt thin. Was Holloway Ventures undercapitalized? If so, what had my 50 grand even been for? I tried reaching out to Preston directly a few times under the guise of discussing the project, but I mostly got his cheerful voicemail or a quick text back apologizing for being swamped and promising to update investors soon. It was around this period that I first noticed odd changes in Jessica's behavior, though I didn't initially connect them to anything nefarious. With the gala over, I assumed she'd have more free time again. Yet she kept going to meetings and dinners related to the foundation or other charitable circles she claimed Preston had introduced her to. She started dressing up a bit more for these outings. Nothing outrageous, but I'd see her in the mirror putting on extra makeup and a spritz of her expensive Chanel perfume on a Tuesday evening, just to have coffee with Marcy from the committee. When I commented jokingly that she looked awfully nice for coffee with a girlfriend, she smirked and said, "Well, one of us should look like more than a grease monkey once in a while," tweaking my chin playfully. I laughed it off. Little things piled up slowly. One night, I saw a faint purple bruise on her hip as she changed into pajamas. I asked about it with mild concern, and she glanced down, seemingly surprised. "Oh, that? Gosh, I don't know. I might have bumped into the corner of my desk at work," she mused. "I was in a hurry yesterday." It sounded plausible enough, so I let it go, making a corny joke about her being a klutz. But then there were other times, like the afternoon I came home early and caught a strong whiff of cologne in our bedroom. Something fancy and definitely not my usual Old Spice. Jessica laughed when I asked about it, flapping the bedsheet. "That's probably from Preston's hug the other day. He wears that designer stuff. Creed cologne or whatever. I noticed it got on my clothes and I washed them, but Maybe the scent lingered. A reasonable explanation, given how often she saw him lately in her volunteer capacities. Again, I pushed away the tiny pang of discomfort. Perhaps the biggest oddity that should have given me pause was her newfound obsession with a grocery store across town. We had a routine of doing our supermarket runs at the Kroger a few miles away. Then, one day Jessica came home raving about Belmead Market, an upscale organic grocery in an affluent neighborhood well out of our usual orbit. They just have the best produce and imported foods, Jake. It's worth the drive, she insisted. Soon, Belmead Market bags became a regular sight in our kitchen. She'd swing by there after her meetings near downtown since it was only 10 minutes away from Preston's office, she said. I grumbled at one point because she stopped buying the brand of coffee and barbecue sauce I liked, items that Belmead didn't carry. Honey, try to understand, she responded with a hint of exasperation. I barely have time to shop, and it's so convenient to get it done while I'm already out that way. I'll find your favorite somewhere else soon, okay? I dropped it, not wanting to start a silly argument. But that conversation planted the first real seed of suspicion in my mind. Belmead Market. I knew the area it was in, Belmead Heights, a wealthy enclave northwest of the city. It struck me later that night lying in bed that Belmead Heights was also where Preston Holloway lived, in a sprawling gated community on the hill. He'd mentioned it once, and I'd seen a blurb in the Dallas Morning News about a garden tour at the Holloway estate. Why would Jessica drive all the way to Belmead Heights to get groceries when we lived 25 miles away? Her explanation that it was near his office didn't hold water. Preston's company headquarters was downtown, nowhere near Belmead. Was she going out to that part of town for another reason? The idea surfaced quietly, unsettling me, but I suppressed it at first. I didn't want to be a paranoid husband. She'd given me what sounded like logical reasons. Still, over the next few days, that unanswered question gnawed at me. I found myself casually checking the odometer on her car on Wednesdays and Fridays, the days she most often had errands or get-togethers. The mileage seemed high for trips that should have just been to work and back or a short hop to a coffee shop. One Friday evening, a week after the grocery discussion, I emptied out her car's trash as a helpful gesture, something I never did, and discovered a crumpled parking garage ticket under the seat. It was from a garage downtown. Fine, but stuck to it was another ticket. This one from a paid parking lot in Belmead Heights. Timestamped 2:45 p.m. on a Wednesday 2 weeks prior. I stared at that little slip of paper in my grimy hand for a long time. It felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Jessica hadn't mentioned going to Belmead that day. She'd told me she was meeting the foundation team for a late lunch downtown. Why had she parked out there in the middle of the afternoon? That was the moment the gnawing dread in my gut crystallized into a terrible certainty. I remember sinking onto my work stool in the garage, heart pounding, telling myself there had to be an explanation that wasn't the one my brain was screaming. Maybe she visited a boutique out there or ran an errand for the foundation. But as I sat there, a cold clarity settled over me. I began mentally connecting dots that I'd willfully ignored for months. The lingering cologne, the bruises, the way Preston and she had interacted, the extra time together, the giddy mood she'd come home in some nights, the over-eager push for me to invest with him. My hands clenched around that damning parking stub. I knew. Deep down, I knew what it all meant. Jessica, my wife, was having an affair. And not just with anyone. She was sleeping with Preston Holloway, the millionaire charmer I had so naively allowed into our lives. The realization hit me like a hammer to the chest, driving the air from my lungs. I felt physically ill, stumbling out of the car and leaning over the driveway, afraid I might actually throw up. A mixture of devastation and white-hot anger washed over me in dizzying waves. She was cheating on me. With him. My wife, with that smug bastard who had shaken my hand and thanked me for my trust when I gave him our money. The two of them must have been laughing at me behind my back this whole time. I don't remember how long I sat in the garage in a stupor, but the daylight was fading when I finally got myself together. I knew I couldn't confront her, not yet. I had no concrete proof beyond circumstantial bits, and I wasn't about to give them the chance to deny everything and go deeper underground. No, if I was going to salvage any shred of my dignity and get the justice I suddenly craved, I needed proof and a plan. I closed the garage and went inside, my mind already whirring with possibilities. That night, I barely slept. I lay next to Jessica, who snoozed peacefully as if she hadn't a care in the world, and I felt like I was next to a stranger. My heart ached something fierce, but each time the hurt threatened to overpower me, I clung to anger instead. Anger was good. Anger would keep me focused. By the time the first pale light of dawn crept through our bedroom curtains, I had resolved on my course of action. I was going to make them pay. But first, I would watch. I would gather the evidence of their betrayal quietly, methodically, and when the time was right, I would use it to destroy both of them. I didn't waste any time once I'd made up my mind. To bring down a wealthy man and my own duplicitous wife, I'd have to be smart, patient, and as cold-blooded as they were. The first step was gathering undeniable evidence of the affair, evidence I could use to confront Jessica and also to protect myself in the inevitable divorce. That weekend, I quietly purchased a GPS tracker and a small voice-activated recorder. The next Wednesday morning before Jessica left for work, I slipped the tracker into the trunk of her Camry, tucked discreetly under the lining. That afternoon, I called up Preston under the pretense of discussing some car issues. Forcing a cheery tone, I thanked him for sending a few clients my way and mentioned I had a new diagnostic machine at the shop. "Bring one of your babies in and I'll give her the deluxe treatment on the house," I offered. He sounded pleased. His ego lapped up gestures like that. We arranged for him to drop off his Mercedes AMG on Friday for a tune-up. By the time Wednesday evening rolled around, I was almost trembling with anticipation and dread. Jessica left for her usual meeting at 5:30, kissing me on the cheek and reminding me she'd grab dinner on the way home. I forced a smile and told her to have fun. Then I watched on my phone as the GPS dot of her car moved. As expected, she didn't head toward downtown. Instead, the dot crawled north toward Belmead Heights. I tailed at a safe distance, but eventually fell back. I didn't want to risk her spotting my truck. Instead, I parked at a gas station and monitored the tracker's signal. Sure enough, it stopped in the vicinity of Preston's gated estate. It lingered there for 2 hours. Later that night, the tracker showed her car moving again. I drove out and stationed myself along the likely route back. Around 9:45 p.m., I spotted her Camry cruising down the highway. She was alone, as far as I could tell, and as she pulled into our driveway, I passed by and looped around the block, arriving home a few minutes behind her. By then, she was in the shower. I retrieved the tracker, no point leaving it long-term and risking discovery, and downloaded its data to my laptop. She had indeed gone straight from work to Preston's mansion and stayed parked there all evening. That data by itself spoke volumes to me, but it wasn't proof I could show others. I needed more. Friday came and Preston dropped off his sleek black Mercedes at my garage as planned. We chatted amiably about cars for a bit. I had to restrain the urge to smash his face in as he stood there, silver hair glinting, an expensive watch flashing on his wrist, thanking me again for being a team player on the investment. The gall of this man, sleeping with my wife while gladly taking my money. I swallowed my bile and even managed a friendly grin as I told him I'd have the car ready by Monday. As soon as he left, I got to work. I wasn't actually going to sabotage the Mercedes. That might tip my hand. Instead, I installed the voice-activated recorder behind the dashboard, wiring it into the 12-volt so it'd have power and not be easily noticed. It was a long shot. I had no idea if he and Jessica ever talked in this car. But given how often I knew he shuttled her around, chances were good. I also carefully affixed a tiny magnetic GPS tracker up under the rear bumper. Now I'd be able to monitor Preston's movements too. That weekend was torture, acting normal while waiting to retrieve the devices. Jessica went about her usual routine, and I played the loving husband, even taking her out for brunch on Sunday like nothing was wrong. Inside, every moment I spent in her presence knowing what I knew made my skin crawl. But I kept my mask firmly in place. Monday morning, I called Preston to tell him his Mercedes was ready. He swung by the shop around lunchtime. I handed over the keys and we chatted a minute about a car show coming up. He was as breezy and confident as ever, absolutely oblivious to the fact that I knew his dirty secret. When he drove off, my gadgets were riding along with him. Over the next 2 weeks, I gathered more information than I could stomach. The GPS trackers showed an overlapping pattern. Most Wednesday evenings and some Friday afternoons, Jessica's Camry and Preston's Mercedes would converge at one spot. Sometimes his mansion, sometimes a boutique hotel near White Rock Lake. Other times a ranch property he owned out in Aubrey. He was shuttling her to multiple love nests. They really had quite the operation going. The voice recorder yielded the most gut-wrenching evidence. I retrieved it after a couple of weeks under the guise of doing a quick check on a check engine light that had mysteriously popped up on his dash, which I induced remotely so he'd bring the car back in briefly. Later that night, alone in my garage with headphones on, I listened to hours of audio. Much was just road noise or benign phone calls. But then there were the conversations between Preston and Jessica. At one point, presumably driving back from their hotel rendezvous, they were laughing together about some risk they'd taken. "I swear, I thought the maid recognized me," Jessica said, her voice tinny through the recording. Preston chuckled. "Relax, babe. Even if she did, she won't say anything. That hotel caters to discretion." There was a pause, some rustling, then Jessica's voice softer. "I do feel a bit guilty sometimes. About Jake?" I clenched my jaw as I waited for Preston's response. "Oh, he's fine," Preston drawled. "How's he going to complain when I'm lining his pockets? You saw how he lapped up that investment pitch? He should be thanking me." My blood boiled, but I kept listening. She sighed. "I know. I didn't exactly marry him for his money, but I wish he had more ambition. With you, everything is private jets and five-star dinners. It's hard to go back to budget beers and burgers." My stomach turned as I realized that the entire time I thought our low-key life made us happy, she was hungering for more. Preston laughed. "Well, once this divorce of mine is settled, you'll have all the high life you want, darling. We just need to be patient a little longer, and we need that second round of funding to come through. Speaking of which, you think he'll bite?" "He's cautious," Jessica answered. Hearing her discuss me so casually, like I was just a mark, brought a fresh wave of hurt. "But I think so. I'm working on him. If not, maybe I can dip into what he gave me for the first investment. He's barely asked about it." I'd rather use his money than yours," Preston mused coldly. "Keep pushing him. Hell, if needed, I'll have the attorneys gin up a guarantee that he'll get his first investment back with interest as part of the second deal. Something to make him feel secure." My hands were trembling. That bastard and my wife were plotting to bleed me dry for their vanity project, or whatever scheme Preston had going, even as they carried on their affair. They truly had no shame. There was a stretch of silence, and then the recorder picked up some unmistakable sounds. Kissing, murmurs, Jessica's husky whisper saying, "Let's not talk about him anymore." And Preston's rumbling reply, "Backseat?" Followed by the squeak of leather and a lot of noise I quickly fast-forwarded through, jaw clenched. I'd heard enough. More than enough. I clicked off the recorder. My heart was pounding not just with rage and hurt, but with something else too. Grim satisfaction. I had them. Adultery, conspiracy. It was all laid out in their own voices. The naive, heartbroken man I'd been 2 weeks ago was gone. In his place was someone steeled, someone who could smile at his enemies while arranging their downfall behind their backs. Now it was time for phase 2. Set the trap. From the recorder, I learned 2 important things. 1. Preston was in the middle of divorcing his wife, Claire. That didn't surprise me. If Claire had gotten wind of his infidelity, she likely set the lawyers loose. 2. They were eager for me to cough up more money, and soon. This was my opportunity. The very next day, I called my attorney, a savvy old fellow named Walter Reed, who'd helped me with some business contracts in the past. Walter was a no-nonsense type, and I trusted him. I scheduled a confidential meeting at his office after hours. There, I laid out as much as I needed to, mostly about the money. I told him I suspected my investment with Holloway Ventures might be in jeopardy, and that the principal behind it was asking for additional funds. I wanted to secure my position aggressively. Walter raised a gray eyebrow. "Aggressively how?" I fixed him with a level stare. "I want to offer a short-term loan or second investment, but I want it tied down with collateral. As much as I can get. And I want default terms that let me take that collateral quickly if anything goes wrong." I paused, then added, "It's personal, Walter. Let's just say the borrower has wronged me in ways beyond money. I have no intention of actually helping him. This is a means to an end." Walter studied me quietly. He's one of those lawyers who's seen it all, so nothing much surprises him. He nodded slowly. "All right, we can certainly draft something ironclad. But you know if it comes to enforcement, it can get messy." I almost smiled. "Oh, I'm counting on messy. Over the next few days, Walter and I worked up a loan agreement designed to be as unforgiving as a hanging judge. We kept the amount modest enough not to spook Preston, $200,000, which included rolling over our initial $50K investment into a consolidated promissory note. In truth, scraping together that much was risky for me. I ended up using my garage as collateral on a bank loan for half of it and liquidating the rest of my emergency funds. It was a gamble I was more than willing to take. The contract stipulated that Preston's company, and he personally as guarantor, would put up his entire classic car collection as collateral, a collection I knew he valued immensely and which was easily worth double the loan amount. It also listed a small piece of land he owned out in West Texas, nothing critical, but property is property. Most crucially, it had a clause that if a single payment was missed or if full payoff wasn't made by the end of 12 months, I could seize the collateral with almost no delay. He'd basically pre-authorized repossession. There was also a confession of judgment clause for the cars, meaning I could walk into court and get an immediate order to take them if he defaulted. It was the kind of agreement no sane businessman would normally sign, which is why I was fairly sure Preston would sign it, because he'd assume his lover, my wife, had me wrapped around her finger and that this was all a friendly deal among family. He might also think I was too soft to ever enforce it strictly. They were counting on my prior gullibility. When I presented the proposal to Jessica one evening, I played my role to the hilt. Hesitant, concerned, but willing to consider it for her sake. We were sitting in our living room. She had just returned from another planning session. Her code for a romp with him, I was certain. I'd been thumbing through the documents when she walked in. "Hey, Jess," I said, feigning an apprehensive look. "I got a call from Preston today. He's asking if we'd be willing to put in more money. Short term, just until the dealership project gets its final financing." I tapped the papers in my lap. He actually sent over a contract. Her eyes lit up momentarily, then she caught herself and tried to appear merely curious. "Oh? What kind of contract?" I handed it to her. "It's basically a secured loan. He'd pay us back in the year, plus 10%. He's even putting up collateral. Looks like his cars and some land." I let a little incredulity into my voice. Honestly, it's pretty generous terms for us. Almost too good to be true. Jessica's gaze flitted over the document. I could see her mind working. She probably hadn't expected me to come around so easily. Clearing her throat, she said, "Well, he's just trying to make you comfortable, Jake. He values you as a friend and partner." The irony of her words was almost laughable. "This would secure our initial investment too, wouldn't it? It rolls it in, right?" "Yeah," I nodded. "Our 50 grand basically becomes part of this loan, and we'd get it all back with interest. That part I do like." I sighed and ran a hand through my hair as if conflicted. "I don't know. It's still risky. If his project fails, we'd have to actually take his cars or something to make our money back. Do I really want to get into that?" She set the papers down and moved closer, draping an arm around my shoulders. I had to resist recoiling. "Sweetie, his project won't fail. He's too smart for that. This is just to tide things over. And if something went wrong, those cars are worth a fortune. It's actually a good deal for us." She gave me that dazzling smile, the one that used to melt me. "I wouldn't steer you wrong, hun. You know I'd never risk our future if I wasn't sure." I looked into her green eyes, marveling at how easily the lies flowed from them. For a second, I let myself feel the hurt again, the betrayal. It must have showed on my face because she bit her lip and added softly, "I know you weren't thrilled with how the first investment went. But this is our chance to fix that, to get everything back and then some. Trust me." She leaned in and kissed my cheek. I closed my eyes as if deeply pondering, then gave a slow nod. "All right. If it means that much to you, I'll sign." Her relief was palpable. She hadn't even realized she was tense. "Really? Oh, Jake, you won't regret it. I promise. This will put us back on track." I forced a chuckle. "Let's hope so. Walter checked it over, and he'll handle the paperwork with Preston's lawyers. We just have to sign and notarize, probably tomorrow." I half expected her to slip up and offer to take it to Preston herself, but she played it cool. "Okay, that's great. Thank you." She hugged me tight, and I could feel her heart pounding. Excitement, no doubt. Her lover's project now securely funded, her two men dancing to her tune, as she probably thought. The next afternoon, we met at Walter's office with Preston and his attorney. The meeting was brief and perfunctory. Preston was all charm, clapping me on the back. "Jake, you're a lifesaver, you know that? We won't forget it when we cut the ribbon on the complex." I smiled modestly, just looking forward to seeing the place finished. Walter went through the documents, and Preston's lawyer raised only a token question or two, mostly about clarifying the timeline and collateral description. The lawyer, a sharp-dressed young man, did arch an eyebrow at the harsh default clause. "This part here is pretty draconian. 3 days late on a payment and Mr. Jensen here can move to possess the collateral? That's, not standard." Preston waved it off before I could respond. "Oh, Lawrence, relax. Jake's not going to screw me over. It's just formalities. We're all friends here." He looked at me and winked. "I'm never going to be late anyway." I returned the wink with a good-natured grin. "Just covering bases. I'm sure it's fine." The lawyer hesitated, then nodded. Jessica sat primly beside me, trying to appear uninvolved, though I noticed a faint flush on her cheeks. She was probably thrilled at how well this was going. Within 10 minutes, signatures were scribbled, copies were made, and it was done. I had just legally become Holloway's creditor, to the tune of $200,000. The money transferred the next day. When I saw the wire confirmation, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and nerves. It was a lot of cash out of my hands. But now the noose was around Preston's neck and I held the other end. In the weeks that followed, I played my part cheerfully while finalizing my divorce plans behind closed doors. Gathering the evidence and setting the trap had given me a focus that dulled the immediate pain of betrayal, but as the dust settled, I found myself wrestling with a flood of emotions. Anger still burned hot, but there was sorrow too. Genuine sorrow for the love I'd lost, or perhaps never truly had. Nights in the apartment above my garage, I'd started sleeping there occasionally, claiming I was working late, were long and sleepless. Bandit, sensing my turmoil, would nuzzle up to me on the cot I kept there. He became my only source of untainted comfort. At home, I continued to behave as normally as possible. It was eerie, living out those final days of pretense. Jessica was sweet and affectionate, likely to ensure I didn't second-guess the loan. If I didn't know better, I'd have thought our marriage was actually in a good place. But I was counting down the hours to the moment I'd rip the facade apart. I chose a Tuesday evening for the confrontation, a day I knew she wasn't scheduled to see him. I wanted her alone and unhurried. That morning, I met with Walter one last time to sign the divorce petition and a carefully crafted settlement offer. Texas is a no-fault divorce state, but evidence of adultery can influence a judge's decision, and I had plenty of that. My offer took it into account. I was willing to let her walk away with a modest cash payment and her personal belongings, but I'd keep the house, the business, and the lion's share of our accounts. In exchange, I'd agree not to drag her affair into open court. Essentially, I was offering to buy her silence and quick cooperation. Walter, who by now had guessed a lot about the situation, asked me if I was sure. "You could bury her, you know? Take her to court, present all this, ruin her reputation." I shook my head. "Ruining her publicly isn't my primary goal. I have other plans for that. I just want her out of my life with minimal fuss. If she signs this, we'll both be free in a couple months." He didn't pry further, just nodded. "All right. Good luck, Jake." I spent that afternoon steeling myself. I went home earlier than usual, around 6 p.m., with copies of everything. The photos I'd covertly snapped of her meeting Preston at a park, one of the few times I'd followed in person and caught them embracing. A flash drive with the incriminating audio and the prepared divorce papers. I tucked it all into a manila envelope. She was in the kitchen making a salad when I arrived. "Hey, you're home early," she said brightly. "Figured I'd make us a nice dinner tonight," I replied. My voice sounded normal. My heart was pounding, but I was oddly calm. Perhaps because I knew this was the beginning of the endgame. I grilled steaks while she chatted about her day. I must have responded appropriately because she didn't sense anything off. We ate at the table, and I could barely taste the food. My mind was reciting the script I'd prepared, but I knew once I started, emotion would kick in. And that was fine. I had months of anger ready to pour out. After dinner, as she started to clear plates, I said, "Leave it for now. There's something I want to talk about." "Sure," she said, returning to her seat, still oblivious. I went to the living room and retrieved the manila envelope from my briefcase. When I sat back down at the dining table, I saw her eyes flick to it. It was unmarked and thick. For just a second, a look of uncertainty crossed her face. Perhaps some part of her sensed a coming storm. I placed the envelope on the table between us and folded my hands. I had envisioned starting with a clever one-liner or an outburst, but now that the moment was here, I felt strangely tired. I simply said, "Jessica, I know." She blinked. "You know what?" But her voice had changed. There was a tremor beneath the casual front. I looked at her, really looked at her. One last time as my wife. She was as beautiful as the day I met her, but it was all surface now. I felt like I was gazing at a stranger wearing a familiar face. "I know about you and Preston," I said quietly. Her reaction was immediate, a sharp inhale, eyes widening. "Jake, what are you talking about?" She forced a laugh, but it came out brittle. "That's crazy. You know about me and Preston?" "There is no me and Preston." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the envelope and casually slid out a glossy 8x10 photograph. The clearest shot I had, taken with a telephoto lens, of Preston kissing her against the hood of his Mercedes by the park. I placed it in front of her. She went utterly still. Her eyes locked on the image, her lips parted, but no sound came. I then took out my phone, tapped it a few times, and set it on the table. Preston's voice burst from the speaker, crackling slightly. "He should be thanking me. He lapped up that investment pitch. Rather use his money than yours." In the silence of our dining room, the recording was deafening. Jessica's face lost all color. She reached out as if to snatch the phone, but her hand stopped short. I stopped the playback and looked at her. I could feel my calm beginning to crack as months of betrayal and hurt surged within me. "Do you understand now?" I said, voice low. "I know. I've known for a while. I didn't want to believe it, Jess. God, I did not want to believe that the woman I loved could do this." My voice shook despite my efforts to steady it. She pushed back from the table slightly, one hand covering her mouth. "Jake, I'm so—" She didn't finish, instead, sucking in a breath as tears welled in her eyes. It was astonishing. I hadn't seen her cry in years, and I might have thought her tears genuine if I didn't know better. I held up a hand. "Don't, just don't. I'm not here for an explanation or an apology. It's too late for that." I slid the rest of the envelope's contents toward her, the divorce papers. "I'm here to end it. Read those. Get a lawyer if you want. But it's over." Jessica picked up the papers with trembling fingers and glanced at them. Suddenly, she burst into soft sobs. "Mike, please, let me explain. I never meant to hurt you." I let out a bark of laughter that was more like a snarl. "You never meant to hurt me? What did you think would happen? That I'd just fund your affair and then quietly disappear?" She flinched. "No, I was confused. I made mistakes. But we can fix this. We can—" "Stop!" My chair scraped as I stood up. I couldn't sit anymore. I was too keyed up. I paced a few steps, running a hand through my hair. The floodgates were open now. Do not insult my intelligence by pretending this was some momentary lapse or mistake. This was calculated, Jessica. Cold-blooded. You targeted me to bankroll your fling with that asshole. Was any of it ever real? Did you ever love me at all, or was I always just a stepping stone to the lifestyle you really wanted?" She sobbed harder, mascara starting to smear. "I did love you. I do. It's not that simple." "Not simple?" I echoed, almost choking on the words. "It's incredibly simple. You're a liar and an adulterer, and a damned greedy one at that." I jabbed a finger at the evidence on the table. "Oh, you think I don't see it now? The fancy events, the sudden volunteering, buttering me up to invest money. God, you and Preston played me for a fool." She shook her head vigorously, standing as well, hands clasped together in supplication. "No, it wasn't like that. Jake, please listen. I got in over my head. Yes, I had an affair, but it wasn't about hurting you. I just wanted more than what we had. Oh, I'm well aware of that," I cut in, voice icy. "And you found someone who could give it to you. Congratulations. You two deserve each other truly." She took a tentative step toward me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know you won't believe it, but I am. I was weak and stupid. But what we had was real, Jake. At least for me. You gave me love and stability when I needed it. I never stopped caring about you." I felt a stabbing pain in my chest at those words, because a part of me desperately had wanted to hear them weeks ago, had wanted her to fight for us, but it was far too late. Caring, I said softly. Is that what you call it? Sneaking around behind my back, lying to my face every day? Draining our accounts for him? That's a hell of a way to show you care. I nodded toward the divorce papers. If you truly care at all, sign the papers. Let's get this done. Tears streamed down her face and she shook her head slowly. Whether in disbelief or refusal, I wasn't sure. There was a flicker of anger in her eyes now, mixing with the fear. You already got a lawyer. Drew these up. She looked at me almost accusingly, as if my preparation somehow wronged her. I gave a mirthless chuckle. Of course I did. Did you expect me to confront you with nothing? Trust me, I have more than enough grounds. I could ruin you in court, drag Preston into it, make a public spectacle. The settlement I'm offering you is more than fair. My tone grew hard. Take it, because the alternative will leave you with nothing. She swallowed and looked down. I could tell the gravity of the situation was sinking in past the shock. Jessica had always been savvy when it came to self-preservation. Wiping her eyes, she said very quietly, What? What are the terms? I laid it out flatly. You keep your car and whatever personal items you want. I'll give you a lump sum. I named a figure that made her eyebrows twitch. It was enough for her to start over comfortably, but not a penny more than I was willing to stomach. I keep the house, the garage, and most of our savings and investments. You waive any claim to support. We file uncontested on grounds of irreconcilable differences. I locked eyes with her. If you don't agree, then I'll file for adultery and drag this into open court, and I will subpoena Preston and anyone else necessary. Your parents, your friends, they'll all learn what you've been doing. She winced as if slapped. For a long moment, the only sound was her hitched breathing as she tried to compose herself. Finally, with trembling hands, she picked up a pen from the end of the table. You're a lot colder than I ever realized, she whispered, voice breaking. I said nothing. I simply watched as she signed each marked line. My chest felt oddly tight, a mix of triumph, sorrow, and disgust swirling inside. When she was done, she set the pen down and slumped into her chair, covering her face with her hands. I gathered the signed papers and slid them back into the envelope. Jessica peered at me between her fingers, mascara smudged around her red-rimmed eyes. I'm so sorry, Jake, she choked out. I know you might not believe it, but I never wanted to hurt you like this. I held up a hand again, weary. No more, Jess, we're past apologies. I stood and looked at her for what I hoped would be the last time. I'll have Walter file these tomorrow. I'll be staying somewhere else tonight. Take whatever time you need to arrange your move. I think it's best if we don't see each other for a while. She nodded miserably, fresh tears falling. Okay, she whispered. Bandit had been lying in the doorway, ears back, sensing the tension. Now he padded over to me. I knelt and ruffled his fur, my throat tightening. I realized suddenly that I might even lose my dog in all this. She loved Bandit too. But then Jessica spoke up softly from behind me, as if reading my mind. Take him. I know you'd rather be with you. I pressed my face into Bandit's neck for a moment, grateful for that small mercy. Then I rose, grabbed my keys and the envelope, and headed for the door. Jessica followed a few paces behind, stopping at the threshold. I opened the door, then paused and glanced back. She stood there in the dim foyer, arms wrapped around herself, shivering though it was warm. She looked small and scared and infinitely sad. There was a time I would have rushed to comfort her at the sight of those tears. Now I just felt empty. Goodbye, Jess, I said quietly. Her face crumpled, but she managed a tiny nod. Goodbye, Jake. And with that, I walked out, Bandit trotting by my side. The next few months passed in a haze. Our divorce proceeded quickly since she didn't contest. We communicated only through lawyers. I moved into a short-term rental house near my garage, throwing myself into work to keep from drowning in the emotional aftermath. Some nights I lay awake replaying the past few years, wondering how I'd missed the signs, how I'd let myself be used so thoroughly. But whenever those thoughts threatened to overwhelm me, I thought of Preston's smug face and Jessica's lies, and my resolve hardened again. I had done what I needed to do. Jessica kept her word and stayed out of my way. She moved in with Preston not long after I left, or so I heard. Perhaps they thought they'd ride off into the sunset together now that I was dealt with. But I still held the reins of Preston's financial fate, and that chapter was just beginning. Predictably, Preston's shiny enterprise continued to falter. By the time our divorce was finalized, a mercifully swift 60 days later, Holloway Ventures had missed 2 consecutive loan payments to me. His attorney sent a polite letter citing temporary liquidity issues and asking for patience. My attorney, at my instruction, replied curtly that the terms were crystal clear. I suspect Preston still didn't believe I'd actually play hardball. He was about to learn otherwise. Sure enough, by the 3rd missed payment, I took action. Armed with the confession of judgment he'd signed, I got a court order enabling immediate repossession of the collateral. On an overcast morning, I arrived with a team of repo specialists at the warehouse where Preston stored his beloved classic cars. Using the key and codes provided in our agreement, I opened the doors and let the tow trucks in. We had loaded 2 vehicles when Preston showed up. He must have gotten an alert or call. He came screeching into the lot in his Bentley and stumbled out, his face a mix of panic and fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted, striding toward me as one of the workers winched his prized '69 Camaro, the very car I'd restored, onto a flatbed. I stood calmly, arms crossed. "Executing my rights under our contract," I replied. "You defaulted. I'm collecting collateral." "You son of a—" His hands clenched, and for a moment I thought he might actually swing at me. 2 of the repo guys tensed, ready to intervene. I subtly shook my head at them. I wanted to handle this myself. Preston jabbed a finger toward the tow truck. "Get that down. You can't just take my cars." "Oh, I can." "Check the court order if you'd like." I nodded at Walter, who was standing by with paperwork. "We're fully authorized." Preston's face turned a shade of purple. "Jake, let's be reasonable. We can work out a new payment schedule." "Hell, you'll get your money. I just need a little more time. Like the time you gave me to pay back what you and Jessica took," I asked coldly. His mouth snapped shut at that. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "No more grace periods, Preston. You made your choices. Now you live with them." His jaw flexed. "This is her doing, isn't it?" he hissed. "She egged you onto this." I laughed quietly. "My ex-wife has no say in my decisions anymore. This is all me. You gambled that I wouldn't enforce our deal. That was a mistake." He stared at me for a long moment, 1,000 calculations seemingly running behind his eyes. I think it finally dawned on him that there would be no miracle reprieve. Shoulders slumping, he looked away. "Take them then," he muttered. "Take it all." I almost felt a twinge of pity as I watched him turn and trudge back to his Bentley. But then I remembered the sneer in his voice on that recording when he bragged about lining my pockets, and the pity evaporated. He had set this game in motion. I was simply making sure I won. Within hours, every one of those gorgeous cars was in my possession. I didn't revel in it as much as I expected. It all felt grimly businesslike. Over the next month, I sold most of them off through auctions and private sales. The market for classics was strong. Strong enough that, after clearing the remainder of Preston's debt and covering legal expenses, I ended up with a tidy surplus. I kept one car for myself, the cherry red Camaro that I'd poured my sweat into restoring. There was something poetic about that. Meanwhile, Preston Holloway's empire was crumbling. Word got out in business circles that he was insolvent, and soon after, news of potential fraud in his luxury development surfaced. By the end of the year, the SEC and state authorities were investigating him for misusing investor funds. I suspect Claire, now his ex-wife, may have helped those wheels turn, given what she knew of his finances. When Holloway Ventures declared bankruptcy, I swooped in and bought a certain prime parcel of land at a fire sale price, the very lot where his fancy auto complex was supposed to rise. It was an indulgence, perhaps, but the price was right, and I had plans of my own for expanding my garage. Plus, seeing my name on the deed to what had been Preston's dream felt damn satisfying. As for Jessica, her downfall was less public, but I imagine equally complete. The last I heard, not long after I repossessed the cars, she quietly left Dallas. Rumor was that her relationship with Preston fell apart under the pressure of his financial ruin and legal troubles. I wasn't surprised. Without money and excitement binding them, what was left? She had no job, she'd quit the clinic during our marriage, and a tarnished reputation among mutual acquaintances who eventually learned why we divorced. I have no idea where she is now. Part of me hopes she finds a way to live a better life far from me. Another part of me doesn't care as long as our paths never cross again. In the spring following that brutal year, I found myself standing once more in a vacant lot, but this time it was the future home of my new business venture. On the very ground where Preston's grandiose auto plaza was meant to be, I broke ground for an extension of my own garage, a performance tuning shop and showroom that, while modest by comparison, would be entirely mine. As I oversaw the early construction, Bandit trotting happily at my side, I realized I felt something I hadn't in a long time: contentment. The vengeance I carried out was thorough and, yes, cold. Jessica and Preston lost nearly everything they valued: money, status, each other's company. In the end, they paid the price for their betrayal, and I in turn reclaimed something priceless: my self-respect and my freedom. Do I dwell on what happened? Not if I can help it. I'd rather spend my days under the hood of a classic GTO or cruising down a back road with Bandit's head out the window of that '69 Camaro. I'm a little older, a lot wiser, and I bear some scars that will probably never fully fade. Trust doesn't come easy anymore. I haven't dated since the divorce, and I have no immediate desire to. Alone doesn't mean lonely. I learned that the hard way, but I learned it. On evenings when I close up shop, I sometimes find myself reflecting on just how drastically life can change. A year ago, I was a naive husband blissfully ignorant of the storm brewing around him. Now I stand on solid ground of my own making, beholden to no one's whims or schemes. Perhaps that's the ultimate triumph. Not that I won, though I did decisively, but that I survived, learned, and moved forward on my own terms. One of these nights, I'll take that red Camaro out and drive west until dawn, just because I can. The road ahead is wide open, and for the first time in a long time, free of shadows. Jessica and Preston are nothing more than lessons learned, and ghosts left behind on that cracked asphalt of yesterday. I bear them no further malice. They've made their beds, and I assume they're lying in them, for better or worse. As for me, I've chosen to be alone for now, alone by choice, not by defeat. And in that solitude, I've found a peace that I once thought impossible. The betrayals and revenge that consumed the last year are now just parts of my story, not the end of it. I breathe in the warm Texas air and close my eyes, listening to the soft pant of Bandit at my feet and the distant hum of traffic beyond. I've walked through fire and come out the other side stronger, tempered like steel. I reclaimed control of my life from those who sought to manipulate and destroy it. The sun dips low in the sky, casting long golden rays over the concrete slab that will soon host my expanded garage. I pat Bandit and open the door of the Camaro. He jumps into the passenger seat eagerly. I slide behind the wheel and fire up the engine, its throaty rumble filling the air. With a final look at what was once a monument to Preston's ambition and my own heartbreak, I put the car in gear. The tires crunch over loose gravel as I pull away, leaving that empty lot and everything that happened there behind me. Whatever lies ahead, I face it on my terms, unburdened, unafraid, and unbound.